So thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Ian McSweeney. I'm the director of Agrarian Trust. I live in southern New Hampshire. Grateful to join you all tonight. I've spent some time living in the Northwest in Portland and have family in San Juan Islands and in Seattle. And we will talk to you tonight about Agrarian Trust and the Agrarian Commons model. So grateful you all could join us.
Hi, super stoked to see you all here. My name is Rhys Torvalhansen, and I am a staff member with Agrarian Trust. I live out here on the West Coast, right on the Canadian-US border on Coast Salish land in the place now called Point Roberts. And I work with the trust on the national level, and then I also am helping to steward the local commons involvement here in Washington State and on the West Coast to grow the model of what we're doing. Yeah, just really excited to share with you all tonight a bit about what we're doing and how we're changing conversations around land access and tenure. We're going to be sharing lots of links and resources for you to dive into. So we're excited, yeah, to offer this whole bouquet of different things to dive in with and see what the possibilities are.
Thanks, Rhys. And so we will allow for questions along the way. We also have some time left at the end for questions and really want this to be an interactive discussion. So grateful you're here and we can dive in and share.
Great. So I'm going to start us off really quick here. We want to share a couple of slides as we talk about what we're doing and share a little bit more of our model. But first, we wanted to take some time to talk about why new models for land access, particularly for farmers, and why new models for relationship with land and living systems are needed, and in particular with farmland. And the reality is that farmland is in a space of really deep crisis right now in the United States. We're focusing mostly on the United States because that's where our work is, but we know that that's the reality in Canada as well. We're looking at having 400 million acres of farmland that's going to be transferring hands in the next 20 years. And that our farmers are an aging population. And for every farmer that is under 25, there are 5 who are above 75 years old and are going to be looking to retire and wind down their work.
And the reality is that the market value of farmland keeps going up year over year. We see increase in per acre farmland values. We see decrease in farmer income as well. And things like other land conservation work help address that to some level. But really, what we see is that farmers need land, whether it's ownership, whether it's tenure, whether it's relationship to land, they need land. And farmland in the United States continues to be consolidated, that 41% of farmland is held by largest 8% of farms, and 98% of farmland is owned by white people. So it's really, an unjust situation that's getting worse in many ways. The pandemic isn't accelerating that. The reality is from 2012 to 2017, according to USDA, we lost 37 mid-sized farms every single day. So every single day, 37 mid-sized farms, those farms that feed us, that are connected to community, that we're part of, that we might step onto and spend time on, are being lost every day in this country. And so what are we going to do about that? And farmers are struggling. As you can imagine, farmers have some of the highest suicide rates out of any profession. They devote their life and pour their heart into the land and into cultivating the land, growing food, and connecting community. And the struggles are real, from economic to market to weather. They go on, but we're really in a crisis for a number of reasons. And go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, and the foundation to all of this, we can share facts and figures, but presently and really over time being as colonists stepped onto this land and began to take land and steal land and extract land from people, we've lost connection to land. We've changed how we view land to a more commodity-based framework of land. And through that, we've lost relationship with land and with each other.
Yeah, so we knew that if we were going to come at solutions for this with multiple solutions for multiple communities, that we couldn't come with just a market solution or a commodity solution, but we really need to look at as land as part of a whole living system, as part of, as Ian said, like it's a heartbeat of a community, not just for humans, not just for economic systems, but for the other beings that share it with us. So we're going to share some more about the solutions we're coming up with, and we have some beautiful artwork made by Katie Shelley and a number of other folks, mostly Katie Shelley, to demonstrate the model. And I just want to acknowledge before we show you these that some of these drawings are kind of complex, and it's not an expectation that you'll be able to read the whole thing while we show it to you. But we are going to paste in the chat links to where you can find those drawings on our website. So if you want to dive deeper and sift through.
So in really what we Agrarian Trust have done, we're a national nonprofit land trust. My background before this, I ran a private foundation that supported land trust work, primarily around agricultural lands and conservation and transfer and tenure projects. But what we realized with Agrarian Trust is that there's great work that goes on in the land conservation world. Much of that is, conservation land trusts are protecting the natural resources, they're protecting the farmland and other ecosystem resources. Farmers are year in and year out vocalizing the primary obstacle for many of them is access to land, tenure on land, ownership of land. And by and large, land trusts are not addressing ownership and tenure and equity on farmland. They're doing other pieces that are needed in the puzzle or in the stool to support agriculture. But what we thought was needed was land trust focused on ownership, equity, and tenure in farmland. And we also thought what was needed was an interconnected relationship of multiple land trusts. For we as a land trust, a national, small, emerging land trust, white founded and led, felt that, we shouldn't be owning land. We shouldn't be making decisions. We shouldn't be holding equity in land. That really, how do we create a model that localizes certain aspects within community, ownership, autonomy, decision-making, equity, and brings forward the resources we as a national land trust, fundraising, communications, networking, legal and other financial and technical service advising supports can bring. So how do we create a multi-structured entity that can hold land locally in community and be supported both nationally and supported interconnected across one another? So what you're looking at here in this illustration is we Agrarian Trust are part of the model. We are a national land trust. As I said, we can help raise money, we can help with administration and communication, but really we should be part of something, but we should not be leading something or controlling something. So what we are part of is part of creating Agrarian Commons, these localized, community-centered, community land trusts that are focused on agriculture. So these Agrarian Commons hold ownership title to farms. These Agrarian Commons are made up of community stakeholders, Agrarian Trust, and they're made up of the leaseholding farmers that are then on the farms held by that commons. And so that's what this picture depicts, is the board of each Agrarian Commons is 1/3 Agrarian Trust, 1/3 community stakeholders, and 1/3 leaseholding farmers. The Agrarian Commons is where the land and farms and other agrarian assets are held, and they're connected to the community, they're connected to Agrarian Trust, and the whole structure is interconnected to itself. And the exciting thing that you'll see later is that this structure is also interconnected to multiple agrarian commons across the country. So this is the model. To share a little more detail, there's two variations on the model. And as Rhys shared, there's a lot of detail in these illustrations. There's more explanation on our website. There's more explanation in different resources we'll share later. But really, there's a 501c25 structure and a 501c2 structure that are very similar to what I just described. These illustrations get into more of the details of what is different about each. The primary difference I'd like to bring forward today is that the 501c25 allows for multiple C3 entities to be part of that, where, as I described before, it was just Agrarian Trust helping to collaborate with the local community to create an Agrarian Commons. In the C25 structure, there's multiple, at least 3, according to IRS, and up to 38, according to IRS, C3 entities that can come together and form the C25 structure that we call the Agrarian Commons. So we have one C25 in Montana. The rest of the Agrarian Commons we've incorporated are C2 structures.
So I'm gonna pause for a second. I really love like the rich detail of all of this. I'm a newer staff member with Agrarian Trust, so I've come in a little bit later and sort of learning this as we're sort of launching, and kind of want to reflect back what this has like looked like on the ground in my experience. And it's been this really beautiful kind of organizational dance between the expertise and resources of a national organization and the learning that's available through a network, with the independence and self-governance of a local community controlled controlled initiative. And so out here in the Puget Sound Agrarian Commons, which we founded about a year ago, we've often come and said, how should we do this, Agrarian Trust? How should we set up these systems? And Ian has responded, sometimes, how do you want to do it? Like, what is the best interest of your community? I can't possibly know. I can offer you examples from other commons. I can give you resources for how people are thinking about this. But I've really appreciated the sort of like, we're not here as a national organization to tell you what to do. We're here to be a trellis for you to grow a really robust organization in your local community that serves your stakeholders and meets what is needed. And the other thing I want to point out that I think is really unique and really worthwhile, and will speak to those of you who are coming to this festival, is that the governance is shared equally between Agrarian Trust staff members who are there to offer support, community stakeholders who are there to enrich, and the farmers themselves. So we were trying to interrupt some of the power dynamics that happens between landholders and leaseholders in the decision-making of that land. How can you feel secure in the decision-making if there's some other entity that is ultimately holding the strings? So when we invite that farmer to be a leaseholder on a commons, they're going to be an equal with us and share in the decision-making sharing the decision-making of how the money of their lease money is spent. They're paying in, they get to help it go out as well. Should we look at some of the equity models, Ian, or do you want to speak more?
Yeah, please. Yeah, that's so really to kind of expand upon that we Agrarian Trust hold certain values and have principles as an organization that we want to see manifested in this Agrarian Commons model. How that looks is going to look different from one Agrarian Commons to the next, and so there's kind of a balance that we try to achieve between kind of what the Agrarian Trust in kind of facilitating the creation of these Agrarian Commons models, and Agrarian Trust as part of the board of each Agrarian Commons, and the localized individual Agrarian Commons, one to the next, make decisions. So, certain things like equity, land equity, human equity, and financial equity, there's that demonstrates the balance that, we Agrarian Trust, in creating this model, the Agrarian Commons, we worked with stakeholders from across the country and had two kind of year-long committees after we had decided upon, the legal structure that was going to work for a commons, to kind of get input from those committees and build out the founding documents. So, the bylaws, articles of incorporation, the lease, farm standards, and stewardship structure, like all of those are documents that we put forward templates to start from. And those templates that we start from kind of ensure that certain values are carried forward. So, human equity, land equity, financial equity are important to us. So things like rights of nature being part of the lease documents are important to us. Things like financial equity that Rhys was just touching on, where the farmer is part of the Commons Board. The Commons Board is the body that determines the lease terms as far as cost of lease. The Commons Board is then collecting that lease revenue and deciding how to reinvest that into the farm properties held by that commons. So the financial equity of what is affordable and how do we reinvest that lease revenue collected back into the farms is a area where we Agrarian Trust are requiring a certain structure, and local Agrarian Commons are then making decisions about how they manifest that. So there's multiple kind of aspects like that where it's a real balance between the national and the local, and consideration for what the land and the farm enterprise itself is going to need most.
Great. I see we have an audience question. Do you want to address that now, Ian, or do we want to save that? We were going to talk about it a little bit later in the session too, but I just think it's a great question. So
yeah, like why don't we come back to that, because there's a
okay.
fair amount we could and should touch on that one. But
okay, great. So I'm just going to show you all here a quick map of actually we're going to stay on that. Yeah, I'm going to show you a quick map. It's a quick map of most of our commons across the United States. You can see that they are mostly on the East Coast right now, but as a happy Salmon Nation resident, I'm hoping to see more orange dots pop up here on the West Coast. But while I leave that up for people to take a look, Ian, do you want to talk some more about how the Agrarian Trust model is different than other land trusts?
yeah, happy to. And just to add a point to that map, that it's not completely accurate to location, but what those kind of sizes of the ovals are trying to depict is that each commons locally decides their geographic focus area, and it can expand or contract over time. And that geographic focus area is the area within which they work. And the work is to hold multiple farms. The bylaws set an intention, but not an obligation, an intention of growing to hold between 4 and 12 farms. So what this map is showing is some commons have decided locally that their region that they focus on is some are statewide focused, some are more regionally focused. And that is really because of the farms they're working with, those involved, and where they think kind of the cultural or food shed or kind of agricultural collaborations are appropriate and at what scale. But to kind of expand upon the question asked of, what makes this different than other land trusts, and I touched on to begin with, but to expand on that a little bit is that, for one, most conservation land trusts are focused on conservation easement protection. So that is acquiring certain rights to ensure that natural resources, farmland soils, other ecosystem benefits are protected and maintained, and they're not lost to development, extraction, or other means. Generally, conservation easements leave land in private hands and private ownership. And so that's one aspect that's different for us than most conservation land trusts, but there are exceptions to that. And there's a number of conservation land trusts that have multiple structures of how they work with agricultural lands. But what we do is focus on ownership and lease tenure of agricultural land. So that makes us fairly unique in the conservation land trust world. The other consideration is community land trusts. There's a large number of community land trusts, many fewer than there are conservation land trusts. The reality with almost all community land trusts is they're not as focused on agriculture. There are some that are focused on agriculture or might hold a few farms, but most are focused on the built environment, affordable housing, other community needs, and not on production agriculture or broader kind of agricultural land stewardship. The other aspect of community land trusts that makes them different from conservation land trusts and is really something that we saw as a need in how we structured our model was that community land trusts are rarely operating at a scalable size, that they're more localized to place. They might own one property or a few properties, but there's very few statewide community land trusts, and there's really not a network of local to statewide to regional to national community land trusts in the way that conservation land trusts have created multiple kind of scalable, interconnected organizations and support. So that gets to part of why we've created this Agrarian Commons model in the way we have, is that we feel there's a real need for interconnected support and resilience in a community land trust model, and that interconnected support coming from multiple community land trusts and coming from a national organization also being involved. And I think that the real kind of lesson in history of why that's so important is just looking at new communities in Georgia, a kind of original community land trust, and looking at how that community land trust has been treated from day one through present day, that they have not been provided supports or resources or protection against racist discrimination in the way conservation land trusts have. And so we really need to think about building models that are resilient and have some scalability that can support one another and build kind of allegiance and power and protection for one another. So that in many ways makes it different. The other thing we looked at is, there are commons models throughout the world that have been operating for hundreds of years. The commons as a concept is much newer in the United States. There are examples of the commons. The most kind of recent example in modern times that I uncover is with the fisheries industry and the transition from a commons-based resource of the oceans to a privatized resource of the ocean. So there's still fisher people who are operating during that transition period to present day. So there's a lot more awareness there than in the agricultural community of common structures generally in the United States. Elsewhere, though, we've seen over the last 2 decades, there's been a kind of community-centered, multiple entity structure, as I've described, that has really exploded across Europe in many ways. It started in France 18 or 19 years ago now. And the organization there has grown to have upwards of 25 local community-centered landholding entities and over 180 farms now held in that structure. And that was one organization that started, but now there's 18 or more countries in Europe that have Some are, public entities, some are nonprofit entities, some are quasi-public entities, but that have kind of community-centered, nationally supported, interconnected farmland holding structures to own farms and convey equity, tenure, and share in stewardship. And so seeing that, in very recent times, creation of this model in France and then the growth across Europe is a real indication of what's possible. And I would argue what is needed in the United States, given that 400 million acres of land in transition. The reality is we need so many models to receive land and be an option for agricultural land as we're in this transition period. So we hope we're, a small drop in the bucket and perhaps an inspiration for other drops in the bucket that can make a difference.
I also point out one thing that I really love about kind of having this interconnected network of similarly structured, but operating slightly different entities that are all in conversation together and in collaboration, is that we have no illusion, as Ian said, is like that this is the solution. And we're really excited to share out like what we've learned and what we are learning as these are growing around the country, to offer that to other people, open source, so that they can, hack that, improve it, remix it for what they know. We know that there's an incredible amount of systemic racism, tons of problems with lack of access to land and resources in nonprofits and in the way that power and resources are held. And we don't feel like we are in the right position to have all those solutions, but we are excited to co-learn and co-create with others in the community, particularly populations who've been really impacted by unjust land transfer, recognizing that it's, all of us owe our existence because of that topsoil and the care and stewardship of that topsoil and access to it. Anything else you want to add, Ian, before we talk about our awesome Salmon Nation projects?
Let's dive into some localized examples.
Yeah, so here on the West Coast, we've got the Cape Valley Agrarian Commons, which Ian will share a little bit more about. And then I'll talk about what's going on with the Puget Sound Agrarian Commons up here in Washington State.
Yeah, and so to kind of frame a bigger picture of that and then zoom into kind of this Northern California example, is that the bigger picture is that we really wanted to create a model that we thought would be useful in many ways. Also, we really wanted to create a model that people could identify with, and people being, the diversity of people and communities we have across the country, and the diversity of kind of stages of a farm business, stages of landowners' decision-making process, like people involved, like, we don't think there's a one-size-fits-all model in the commons itself. We also don't think the commons is a one-size-fits-all. So we really tried to kind of strategically cultivate different examples of what a commons could look like. And then we incorporated 12 Agrarian Commons on May Day of 2020 as we kind of entered into the pandemic. It was a planned launch at that point in time, delayed slightly given the pandemic, but we, stepped forward, incorporated these 12 Agrarian Commons. We've since added 2 more, but really of those, we wanted to have a real diversity of location, of farms involved, of landowners involved, of stages, of farm business, and kind of land seeker needs, to demonstrate that this could be a model that's adaptable and can work for many different needs around agricultural land holding. So in California, we came together with a number of long-standing organic and earlier kind of CSA, the modern kind of European-founded white-led CSA movement, farms that were kind of at stage of retirement or within 5 plus or minus years of retirement, and had a career's worth of wisdom and investment in soil and building of community, and really we're needing solutions and needing options, and there's a robust community of conservation land trusts that exist in the area, but they're there to protect the natural resources. They're not really there focused on who's going to own, who's going to have tenure to. Generally, they're also not focused on the types of agriculture either. So a real interest in Cape Valley was to find a way to maintain this organic agriculture, this food production agriculture, and to bring farms that have been operating for a generation or more forward into a new generation in a way that kind of was financially possible for exiting farmers and financially possible for incoming farmers, in a way that considered equity of the land and both entering and exiting farmers. So commons came together. We're still kind of in the stage of exploring land projects, but have a number of kind of, very near retirement farmers who are thinking about the next step. So it's really kind of a great community that holds wisdom of kind of how do we deal with a transition from a lifetime of farming into a new generation without needing to destroy the farm, which is, the choice for many farmers. Their way to cash out is to sell to a non-farmer who may plow up the soil and build housing, may turn it into an estate farm, may, transition into commodity agriculture or something else, where these farmers really wanted to see their type of agriculture they had practiced carry forward. And so the lease in the Agrarian Commons and our Agrarian Trust values speak to chemical-free regenerative food production agriculture, and the lease being a vehicle that can define that and then help enforce that on an annual basis and be adaptable, because we all know that organic agriculture as defined and as a certifying body has changed quite a bit over the last 20 years, and we may not want to hold ourselves to a label that is controlled and changed by dollars and lobbyists. But the intention of chemical-free agriculture is something we may want to continue. So, that's pieces of this Agrarian Commons, but some that I think are really useful to pull forward. So Rhys, you want to share a little bit closer to home?
Yeah, thanks. So Puget Sound Agrarian Commons. We're focusing, on the Puget Sound waterways and the islands and coastlands that make up Western Washington State. Our first farm that we have is on Whidbey Island. And I'll just take a moment that's the traditional and ancestral lands of the Tulalip and the Stillaguamish and the Suquamish, and ceded under the Treaty of Point Elliott, although recognizing that the United States government almost immediately violated that treaty. So there's both rights and injustices in that land transfer. We have a 10-acre farm on Whidbey Island that's been in hay production for the last 10 years. And that was gifted into the Agrarian Commons by somebody who really believed in what we're doing. And I could talk a little bit about that, but I feel weird about it, Ian, because you were there for the gift. This woman, Carolyn Gardner, she lives on Whidbey Island. For those of you who are not familiar, it's the longest island in Washington State, just across the water from kind of Seattle, Everett, I-5 corridor. Like a lot of Western Washington, it's been facing, enormous development pressure. There's development pressure both from Seattle population extending, but also the base extending. And islands are really fragile in terms of their food shed because we're dependent on ferries, we're dependent on these kind of long transportation chains, which is silly because it's a really food-rich area, and it just has to do with kind of the centralization of our systems. So because, Carolyn Gardner felt really in her heart the worry for how farms and farmers were going to make their livelihood there, she decided to donate this 10 acres into the Commons, which was our first land gift, and yeah, really kicked off the Agrarian Commons movement nationally as well as locally. Anything you want to add to that
Yeah.
before?
So,
Yeah.
and I just add too that a real interest in the donation was the property had been acquired by Miss Gardner to create a farm, and she had done that for years, and then was looking to find kind of a farmer herself to carry it forward, and looking to kind of find ways to improve the land and ready it for agriculture. And it was just, as a non-farmer and a landowner who lived somewhat locally, but not on the island, it was difficult for her to find farmer, to kind of develop infrastructure needed to make it possible. And so we Agrarian Trust, part of our history is that we were co-founded by an idea and a need from several organizations and several people who helped create those organizations. So National Young Farmers Coalition, Greenhorns, Farm Hack, and the Schumacher Center felt that there was a need for a land trust to fill this role that we're describing. And they kind of collaborated to create Agrarian Trust. And so our connection to those organizations, we can kind of tap into their work and gain their support in different ways. So National Young Farmers Coalition is full of next generation farmers, many of which are looking for land and looking for security on land. So, our ability to take in land and then collaborate with other organizations, our ability to kind of use our own communications to do outreach, and then engage others for support, others being the local commons itself, is rich with experience and wisdom of other board members, and also to draw on other agrarian trusts and other partner organizations to help kind of support that finding a farmer, also to support kind of investment in the land itself. That we have partnership with Patagonia Foundation that supports a number of our farm projects in thinking about regenerating soil and investing money to improve and regenerate soils and ecosystem and build pollinator habitats. So that kind of partnership allows us to think about regenerating and repairing lands that are so in need of such to cultivate viable agriculture on. So, we're able to take in the land. It's been a slow process to think about and develop our intentions of what is next on the land, and to kind of observe the land and to spend some time investing in the land. But now, right, we have this RFP. We're looking for farmers presently, and we'll be kind of at the stage of selecting a farmer in the near future, and that farmer will join the Agrarian Commons. That farmer will get long-term security on the land, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about the RFP and the local board. And again, this is part of it. I love this model, is like we could decide, what the parameters that we had as a local board and what, we felt like was in best service of community needs. So as a local board, as we started this RFP process, we started a couple considerations. First, recognizing that the Native people here on the West Coast, as well as everywhere on Turtle Island, have been displaced, recognizing the history of those of Japanese descent being displaced from land, recognizing that those of South Asian descent have a history of being displaced out here. And like those specific stories and histories, we wanted to ensure equal access and tenure. And so we're pledging that we're going to seek to have half or more of our commons and of the farms in our local commons to be BIPOC held. There's some, questions around, we don't want to put anybody in a community where they don't have safety. And so that, that kind of goes into the consideration of like where folks match up. I have that, and then also just sort of interrupt the power dynamics that can happen if we have a white majority board and farmers of color as our leasehold farmers. We know that it's going to show up. We're all imperfect people, but just to try and invest in those systems to interrupt that. We also know it's going to be super expensive for a farmer to come in and invest in infrastructure and build their business. So we've decided that we're not going to charge a cash lease for the first couple of years. We're really leaving the door open for the leasehold farmer to ask for what they need. But just as an example, we've talked about doing a graduated lease where there's no cash for the first 2 years. They can spend all of their money and reinvest it in the business or pay for their own time and labor, and then we'll graduate to the full lease amount in about 5 years, although that will still be a below market rate. We're not trying to make money. We're just trying to make sure the taxes are taken care of and make sure that if there's major infrastructure projects that we can reinvest in them and have the resources to be viable. But yeah, we linked to the RFP. We're going to start looking and reviewing applications at the beginning of December. So if you have been looking for farmland, if you know people who've been looking for farmland, we really welcome you to take a look at that. And we're not just excited to match the farmer for this particular property, but we're excited to meet all the rest of you that are aligned in our values around land tenure and equity, and find other opportunities to partner even beyond this, because this is only the first farm, and we could have up to 12 here in the Puget Sound region to have this really thriving network.
Yeah, and this farm project speaks to kind of a larger perspective that touched upon earlier, that over 98% of farmland is owned by white people. The reality is it's not just the land, right? It's predominantly all land trusts are run and led by white people. We're part of that as well. Most financial institutions, most kind of land-based knowledge and legal understanding of transacting land. So it's holding kind of land and all connected assets, resources, and knowledge in such an aggregated, unjust world that we live in now. And so we as a land trust, our work is to transact land and to facilitate the movement of land, the movement of money, and the movement of relationship and access to that land. And so for us, we feel our work is to be that liaison that is able to bring people together and transition land, transition resources, transition assets in a way that brings about land justice that we desire. And we are doing different things to kind of move land justice forward. And so what we're talking to you about right now is our kind of Agrarian Commons based work focused on land. We're also working to create partnerships, and we're developing a fellowship now with Northeast Land Trust, Northeast Farmers of Color, and are putting forward educational workshops and programmatic work with them as well to build and share knowledge. So there's different ways we're trying to engage in this work. Our work now that we're discussing with you is really the Agrarian Commons model, and that is manifesting differently in communities, but many of our projects that we are leading with are things that we're really trying to create that inspiration that I touched upon, create kind of our belief in what's important. So the first project we did, the first land project we did after this donation that we're discussing, was to focus in Maine. Maine is the least diverse state in the nation. We work there with the Somali Bantu community who's operated in the Auburn-Lewiston area for 10 plus years, has multiple different community organizations and nonprofits. One of them is the Somali Bantu Community Association that has a community farm that's grown from 16 families to now over 220 families that are growing food for their food needs there. And yet over a decade, they've been land insecure, sometimes operating on 3 to 4 different sites, driving hours to, to pick, to wash, to pack, to bring to market the food they're growing, and many times having to move from one year to the next. So, our priority is to focus in communities to bring about land justice, bring about human justice in many different ways. There, it looked like providing a collaborative structure in the commons where we could work together to manifest secure land justice for the Somali Bantu community in the Auburn-Lewiston area. We're working now on a project with Indigenous communities in Massachusetts who have been without their home for 346 years as of October 30th of this year. And we're working to rematriate land back to the community there. And we're kind of in the middle of a project there that's somewhat a private endeavor to kind of respect privacy, to respect safety, to respect individuals involved. But it's focusing with communities to manifest land justice in different locations and how that might look locally.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. It's something we spend a decent amount of time talking on and reflecting on as an organization, and how to be really present to that tension between leveraging the social and economic and other power capital that that we hold as white people, with different accesses to that, and trying to use that to leverage opportunities open, and to not exercise control over those opportunities, but really, to hold each other in equal and hold each other in relationship, recognizing, that we're all in this together, and we all benefit from everyone having increased access and having equal access to resources that are our natural rights. We want to leave some time for questions at the end. So if you have them, this is a great time to pop them in the chat. But we wanted to talk briefly about, since we know a lot of the audience is here in Canada and we mostly operate in the United States. So sorry, Ian, if you can talk about, if there's models like this in Canada, if there's movements like that, that people could get plugged in with.
Yeah, so we've been, so as mentioned before, like our hope is that this is, one model of 1,000 or many more. So part of our work to date has been creating this model and trying to create open source resources and share with others as we go. We're expanding the work to create this Commons Alliance initiative to really have more staff capacity to support others in their work to create commons and to develop kind of a library of resources. We have a online toolkit that we developed with Vermont Law School that's on our website, and on their website that's the kind of how to create an Agrarian Commons, and it has all the founding documents we created. It has narrative and questions and dialogue from those 2 years of committee that I discussed. And really it's how can we support, collaborate, and co-learn with others who are also creating commons-based structures. And so, over the last year and a half, as we incorporated this Agrarian Commons structure, we've been working with a handful of other organizations across the country who are looking, or across North America really, who are looking to create similar type structures. So we've been working during that time with Foodlands BC is a great Canadian organization that's been a longstanding land trust. They're looking to create this kind of multi-entity structure to hold farms in a similar way. And so they're a wonderful organization to check out. They have great resources on their website. They're trying, there's different legal considerations and opportunities for how to structure nonprofits in Canada compared to the United States. So they're trying to navigate a path that then create a similar structure to what we've been describing to you, that is something that can be incorporated and operate in Canada. But they've been operating for a long time already and are trying to grow and evolve to create a multiple commons-based structures.
Yeah, I've got a couple of follow-up questions. Maybe we'll come back to those in the end. Yeah, let's follow questions. The other thing we wanted to point out is, yeah, we referenced multiple times, we have these resources, we offer technical expertise, and, again, really wanting to share out the learning that we've had on these models. So Ian, if somebody was interested in getting a commons started in their community or engaging, where would they get started?
Yeah, so the best place would be, go to our website, look at the Commons Alliance tab. There's links to the toolkit there. There's links to resources from other organizations. There's a Commons Alliance email that'll go to a handful of us, and we'd be happy to kind of follow up with conversation. The other aspect of our website to look at is just individual commons, because they're each telling their own story. We're providing incorporating documents as links there as well. We're kind of, as we do work with them, we're building the stories of what they're doing and how it can be a resource for others, from what we've been talking about to something we haven't touched on, but that is really important is, where do the funds come from? And we've created our own online crowdsource fundraising platform and really engaged broad, diverse communities to give large and small dollars to raise money to make these projects possible. And so sharing how we did that in the hope that others can replicate and create their own structures like that is also part of the mix. So yeah, look on our website and be in touch, and we'd be happy to share more. As an organization, we'd also be happy to kind of link all of you who might have an interest with others more locally to you, whether it's a commons, whether it's other organizations, whether it's attorneys, but others who can provide additional support.
Ian, I'll just kind of gather up the questions that we've got here, and we really appreciate the thoughtful questions that you all are putting in. So yeah, this is great. I hope we can do them justice, and if we don't, really please reach out, and we'd be happy to talk with you more. So in the order that they came in, how does your org engage with the land back movement or rematuration of land access and stewardship to Indigenous nations?
Yeah, so part I'd share, and sorry, there's, we said we'd come back to this one, and now we're pressed on time. So there's a lot more to say on this, but part is that we need to use the access, knowledge, and kind of resources we have to make space and then step out of the way. Like, a true land back movement shouldn't involve a white-led nonprofit holding title or being in the middle of things. And yet we have resources, we have kind of assets that we can bring to bear. So, anywhere that we can be that sharing, supporting, collaborative partner, we're happy to. In cases where it makes sense to collectively work and create kind of a structure that is a commons as described, but is kind of wholly held by an Indigenous community, a Black community, other communities of color, like we're doing that now with some of the commons. We're open to kind of adapt and look at different ways to do that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I would add on to that, each, not just on a national level, but each of the commons is sort of considering and engaging in their own ways that are appropriate to their community. And particularly since a lot of the commons are new, we know that we have a lot of work to do to demonstrate trust. There's a lot of good reason for distrust, and we're content to show up and make ourselves available, and make our resources available as appropriate, but really, yeah, as Ian said, want to get out of the way rather than interfere. We had a question around if we were connected to Green Bank Farm on Whidbey. We know Green Bank Farm, they're great. You know, we've been talking to them on and off as we've been getting ready for this process, but they're not currently part of the commons. The farm in question, the Gardner land, is sort of south central Whidbey. Make sure if I am catching all of these.
So, and I'll just jump in with what I think is the next. But so we, the Agrarian Commons, are a U.S.-based nonprofit. The commons we've set up so far are localized to states or regions within the United States. So we're not working in Canada presently. There's been a little discussion and exploration of potentially doing that, but they will to be determined.
And then the last question is: Agrarian Trust recognize that settler agriculture greatly reduces biodiversity and ecosystem health? I would say absolutely. We've thrown around kind of vague words around chemical-free agriculture and regenerative agriculture, but it's really an understanding that settler agriculture is rooted in commodification and extraction, which is not what we're trying to foster and encourage. We're not leading with a this is definitively the way that you need to engage with and have a relationship with growing on your land. But we definitely feel that settler agriculture, particularly of the commodified agriculture, is a big part of why we're in the crisis that we're in right now.
Yeah, and I'd expand too that right, we've been talking about agriculture in general, but some of these properties we're working with, some of the Agrarian Commons we're collaborating with, are more focused on kind of communities connected to food cultivation space, and it's not a larger production agriculture in all cases. Some are more focused on stewarding and regenerating land, and so there's a mix of kind of why and what types of relationship and kind of active management of land that takes place. Our leases speak to set aside of natural untouched land as well to allow kind of natural ecosystems to hold some space in all properties that we're holding. So there's different considerations. And I guess the one other to bring forward is that, this is a nonprofit model. Our work is not to make money, as Rhys mentioned. Our work is not to charge market-based lease rates based on, what's the production level per acre on land, but it's kind of looking at the wholeness of land and the people connected to it, and how to kind of sustain a healthy land base, a healthy human kind of participation, in healthy communities as well.
Yeah, I think that was all of your questions. I'm just having Kel share in the chat. We're really stoked to stay in touch with all of you. We're happy to have you get in touch, do follow-up questions. We really love finding allies and champions and other folks who are thinking about this and thinking about land access around the country. I kind of joke all the time that doing this kind of work, we really work on a geological time scale, not always a human one. So we're always eager to cultivate those relationships and opportunities and thoughtfully engage with them, because you never know what can grow out of that, and what opportunities that you have in your community to really have those community held land and food systems, so that you all have the resources to take care of yourselves in a way that isn't extractive and being sent someplace else. Any final words, Ian, before we sign off?
Well, thank you everyone for joining, and please be in touch. Please, comb through material we have. Please think about the need for new ways to hold land. That farms are closing, as mentioned, 37 a day, mid-sized farms, but really it's farmland and land is being lost to aggregated ownership by wealth and industry on a daily basis. And we need models, we need kind of a cultural awakening and revolution around land justice in this country and land reform in this country, which are, you know, rarely talked about, if at all, if not for the last few years. But we need to kind of, yeah, make this this type of work in all aspects and all structures aware to people across the country, aware to landowners across the country, aware to farmers and stewards and agrarians everywhere.
Yeah, and everyone who's trying to feed their communities, so we can ensure that they have the access to space to do that, and to do so, you know, with dignity and with self-governance is what I would add to that. Well, I look forward to hopefully meeting some of you out and about, and thank you again so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.